Jake Morrison's boots squeaked against the polished floor of Horizon's Gate Station as he pushed his cleaning cart down Corridor 12. The lights had dimmed to night cycle mode, casting everything in that bluish glow that always made him think of old science fiction movies back on Earth. He hummed an old Johnny Cash song under his breath, the same one his dad used to play in the garage on Saturday mornings. Third shift janitor wasn't glamorous work, but it paid decent, and honestly, Jake liked the quiet. No crowds, no supervisors breathing down his neck, just him and the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. He'd been working on Horizon's Gate for about 8 months now. It was one of those massive trade stations that orbited between human and alien space, where dozens of species came to do business. During the day the place was chaos. Aliens of every shape and size rushing around, translators buzzing, the smell of 100 different worlds mixing in the recycled air. But at night? At night it was peaceful. Jake could actually think. He was halfway through his usual route, mopping up a spill near the cargo bay entrance, when he heard something odd. A small sound almost like a bird chirping, but wrong somehow. Faint. Desperate. Jake stopped, turning off his music player. There it was again. Coming from maintenance shaft 7B, one of those access panels that led into the guts of the station. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. Most people wouldn't have cared. But Jake had grown up with 3 younger siblings, and he knew the sound of something hurt when he heard it. He set down his mop and walked over to the panel, kneeling on the cold metal floor. The chirping got louder as he got closer. Jake pulled a flashlight from his belt and carefully opened the maintenance hatch. The hinges creaked softly. 2 golden eyes stared back at him from the darkness. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The eyes belonged to a small creature, maybe the size of a house cat, covered in iridescent scales that shimmered even in the dim light. It looked like someone had mixed a lizard with a bird and added a touch of magic. Beautiful but clearly in bad shape. The creature was pressed against the back of the shaft, trembling. A nasty gash ran along its throat, and dark fluid was leaking from the wound. "Oh man," Jake whispered, his mind racing. He'd seen pictures during the mandatory station briefing. This was a Dracthra hatchling. The instructional video had been pretty clear about Dracthra. Ancient species. Incredibly dangerous. Telepathic. Fiercely territorial. The instructor, a nervous-looking guy named Wilson, had practically begged everyone to report sightings immediately and keep their distance. Dracthra parents were known to destroy entire ships if they thought their offspring were threatened. The hatchling chirped again, and Jake saw it trying to make some other sound, its little throat working desperately, but only producing that sad, broken noise. Its golden eyes were fixed on him, filled with pain and fear. Jake should have called security. That's what the protocol said. That's what any sensible person would do. But as he looked at those eyes, he didn't see an alien threat. He saw what he'd seen plenty of times growing up. A scared kid who was hurt and alone. His sister Katie had fallen out of a tree when she was 7. He remembered finding her in their backyard, crying, her arm bent at a wrong angle. She'd been so scared, and he'd sat with her, holding her good hand, talking to her in a calm voice until their mom got home. This felt the same. Species didn't matter when someone needed help. "Hey there, little guy," Jake said softly, keeping his voice low and gentle. He reached for the first aid kit attached to his cart. It was meant for humans, but basic medical supplies were basic medical supplies, right? He pulled out antiseptic wipes and gauze. "I know you're scared. I know it hurts. But I'm gonna help you, okay? I'm not gonna hurt you." The hatchling watched him, still trembling, but it didn't try to run deeper into the shaft. Jake took that as a good sign. Moving slowly, telegraphing every motion, he extended his hand. "See? Just gonna clean that up. Make it better." As Jake gently began cleaning the wound, his hand steady despite his racing heart, he felt the air change. The temperature in the corridor rose, just slightly. A warmth that didn't come from the station's environmental systems. The recycled air seemed to thicken. Somewhere behind him, in the shadows of the dimly lit corridor, something large moved. Silent. Watching. Jake was too focused on the delicate work of treating the hatchling's injury to notice. His whole world had narrowed to this small creature and making sure he didn't cause it more pain. In the darkness beyond the blue night lights, a pair of enormous eyes opened. Amber-colored, ancient, and filled with an intelligence that predated human civilization by millennia. They watched the human's gentle hands. Watched him murmur soothing words to a creature he should fear. Watched him risk himself for an alien child he'd never met. And those ancient eyes saw something they hadn't expected to see. Something they hadn't seen in a very, very long time. Jake found himself thinking about the hatchling all through his next shift. He couldn't get those golden eyes out of his head, or the way the little creature had finally stopped trembling once its wound was cleaned and bandaged. When his shift ended, instead of heading back to his quarters like usual, Jake made a detour to the station commissary. The clerk, a friendly Zenthari named Blix, gave him a curious look when Jake picked up extra medical gel, the kind that worked on multiple species. Then Jake grabbed a few protein bars, the plain ones that were supposed to be universal nutrition. Blix's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, but he didn't ask questions. That was one thing Jake appreciated about working in space. People minded their own business. On his way back to his quarters, Jake stopped by his locker and pulled out something he'd brought from Earth but never thought he'd use. A children's picture book. The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. His niece had given it to him as a joke when he'd signed up for the station job, saying he'd need something to remember Earth by. The bright colors and simple drawings had always made him smile. That night, when Jake returned to maintenance shaft 7B, he half expected the hatchling to be gone. Maybe its parents had found it. Maybe it had crawled deeper into the station. But when he opened the panel, those golden eyes were waiting for him, and Jake felt an odd sense of relief. "Hey buddy," he said softly. "Brought you some stuff." The hatchling, which Jake had started calling Spark in his head because of the way its scales seemed to shimmer with inner light, chirped at him. The sound was still broken and painful, but there was something almost hopeful about it now. Jake checked the wound first. It was healing, which was good. He applied fresh medical gel and then unwrapped one of the protein bars. Spark sniffed it cautiously, then took a small bite. Its eyes widened and it devoured the rest in seconds. Jake laughed. "Guess that works, huh?" Then he pulled out the picture book. Spark's head tilted, those intelligent eyes focusing on the colorful cover. "See this?" Jake opened to the first page, pointing at the illustration of the tiny caterpillar. "This is how we teach kids back home. When they're too young to read or if they can't talk yet, we use pictures. My sister's oldest boy, Tommy, he couldn't speak until he was almost 4. Doctors said there was nothing wrong, he just needed time. But we didn't just wait. We found other ways to talk." Jake pointed to the caterpillar, then to Spark. "You." He pointed to the leaf in the picture. "Food." He mimed eating and Spark's eyes tracked every movement. Over the next hour, Jake went through the book slowly, creating simple gestures for each concept. Pointing meant want. Drawing a circle in the air meant good. A wave meant hello. A hand over the heart meant friend. What amazed Jake was how quickly Spark learned. By the end of the first night, the hatchling was copying his gestures, its small clawed hands surprisingly dexterous. When Jake waved goodbye, Spark waved back and Jake felt something warm bloom in his chest. The second night, Jake brought more books. Simple ones with clear pictures. They practiced the gestures and Jake added new ones. A thumbs up for yes. A shake of the head for no. Spark was getting it, really getting it. The third night was when things clicked. Jake was showing Spark a picture of a family, explaining the concept with gestures, when Spark suddenly pointed to the picture, then to itself, then out toward the corridor. The gesture was clumsy but clear. "My family. Out there." "You've got family on the station?" Jake asked, even though he knew Spark couldn't answer with words. But the hatchling nodded, another gesture it had learned. Jake should have been terrified. If there were adult Dracthra on the station, he was in serious danger. But instead he felt relief. "That's good," he said gently. "That's really good, Spark. They must be worried about you." What Jake didn't know, couldn't have known, was that he was never alone during these visits. Every night when he left his quarters and made his way to Corridor 12, something massive moved through the shadows behind him. Something that bent light around itself, that moved with impossible silence for its size. Matriarch Valera had been on Horizon's Gate for 6 days now. 6 days since the accident that had injured her offspring. She'd watched the station's security fail to notice her child trapped in the maintenance shaft. Watched aliens of a dozen species walk past without stopping. Her rage had been building, hot and ancient. She'd been planning which sections to destroy first, calculating how quickly she could reduce this place to debris before their pathetic weapons could respond. Then this human had appeared. This small, fragile creature that should have run screaming. And instead he'd knelt down and helped. Valera had been ready to strike if he'd hurt her child. Her kind didn't forgive, didn't forget. But the human's hands had been gentle. His voice soft. And night after night he kept returning. Not for glory. Not for reward. He brought food and medicine and those strange colorful objects covered in symbols. On the second night, Valera's scales had been blood red, the color of imminent violence. But as she watched this human teach her offspring to communicate, something shifted. The red flickered. Dim. On the third night, when the human made her child wave goodbye and her offspring waved back with obvious joy, Valara's scales rippled with a color they hadn't shown in 3 centuries. A soft amber. The color of confusion. Of something she'd forgotten her species could feel. Curiosity. And beneath that, something even more dangerous and precious. The first fragile threads of trust. By the 7th night, Jake had developed a routine. He'd finish his cleaning rounds early, grab the supplies he'd stashed in his locker, and head to maintenance shaft 7B. It had become the highlight of his day if he was being honest. Spark was learning so fast, communicating with gestures and expressions, that Jake almost forgot they couldn't actually talk to each other. Almost. The problem was Spark's throat. The wound had healed on the outside thanks to the medical gel, but something inside was still damaged. Every time the hatchling tried to make sounds beyond those sad little chirps, Jake could see the frustration in those golden eyes. Spark wanted to communicate properly, wanted to make the sounds that came naturally to its species, but something wasn't working right. Jake understood that frustration. He'd watched his sister Katie go through something similar after a bad case of pneumonia when she was 12. She'd lost her voice for weeks, and even after it came back, it was rough and painful. The doctor said she might never sound the same. But Katie hadn't given up. And their other sister, Beth, who was studying to become a speech therapist at the time, had worked with her every single day. Jake remembered sitting in their kitchen watching Beth guide Katie through exercises that seemed silly at first but actually helped. Humming. Making simple sounds. Building up slowly. That's when the idea hit him. Jake pulled out his tablet and sent a message to Beth back on Earth. It would take a few hours for the message to reach her and a few more for her response to come back, but it was worth a shot. He kept it vague, said he was helping a friend with some vocal issues, asked if she could send those exercises she'd used with Katie. Beth's response came through during his next shift, and Jake nearly whooped with joy right there in the middle of the corridor. She'd sent everything. Detailed instructions, video demonstrations, even some new techniques she'd learned in her practice. His sister was the best. That night, Jake came prepared. He'd watched all the videos twice, practiced the exercises himself to make sure he understood them. When he opened the maintenance panel, Spark was waiting eagerly, already waving hello. "Hey buddy," Jake said, waving back. "Got something new to try tonight. My sister Beth, she's a speech therapist back home. Helps people who have trouble talking. She sent me some exercises that might help you." Spark tilted its head, curious. "Okay, so first thing is we start simple. No trying to make words or anything fancy. Just humming. Watch me." Jake took a breath and hummed a low, steady note. He held it for a few seconds, then stopped. "Your turn." Spark tried. The sound that came out was scratchy and broken, and Jake could see the little dragon wince. That's okay, Jake said quickly. "It's gonna hurt a little at first. That's normal. We're exercising muscles that haven't been used right in a while. Just like when you work out and get sore, remember? We talked about that." They'd had a whole conversation the night before about exercise, with Jake doing push-ups to demonstrate the concept. Spark had thought it was hilarious, making that chirping sound that Jake had learned meant laughter. "Let's try again, but shorter this time. Just a quick hum. Ready?" Jake hummed for just a second. "Now you." Spark tried again. Still scratchy but a bit better. "That's it. You're doing great." Jake felt like a proud parent at a school play. "Okay, let's do it again. And again. We'll just keep practicing. Nice and easy." They spent the next 20 minutes just humming. Short bursts at first, then gradually longer. Jake could see Spark getting tired, but the little dragon refused to give up. There was determination in those golden eyes, a stubbornness that reminded Jake of himself. "All right, let's try something different," Jake said, pulling up another video on his tablet. "Beth says sometimes it helps to add vibration. So we hum, but we also put our hand here." He placed his hand gently on his own throat. "Feel the vibration? That helps your brain understand what muscles you're using." Jake carefully reached out and placed his hand on Spark's throat, where the scales were smoother. "I'm just gonna rest my hand here, okay? You hum and feel how it vibrates. That'll help." Spark nodded and tried again. This time with Jake's hand there, something changed. The hum was still rough, but there was a resonance to it that hadn't been there before. A depth. "Yes. Yes, that's it." Jake was grinning so wide his face hurt. "Do it again." Spark hummed again and the resonance grew stronger. The hatchling's eyes went wide with surprise and joy. "You're getting it, buddy? You're really getting it." They practiced for another half hour and each attempt got better. Spark was figuring out how to use those damaged vocal cords, how to work around the injury. The sounds were still far from perfect, but they were sounds. Real, intentional sounds. Jake was so excited he didn't notice his eyes getting wet. He wiped them quickly, laughing at himself. Man, I'm getting emotional over here. You'd think you just won the Olympics or something. Spark looked at him and something passed between them. A moment of pure understanding. Then Jake felt something he'd never felt before. It started as a warmth in his chest, spreading outward like someone had lit a small fire inside his ribcage. But it wasn't painful. It was comfortable. Safe. And with that warmth came feelings that weren't his own. Gratitude strong and pure. Affection, the kind a kid feels for someone who's helped them. And joy, bright and overwhelming. Jake blinked, his hand still on Spark's throat. What was that? Spark's eyes were shining and Jake felt it again. That pulse of emotion, clearer this time. Not words exactly, but meaning. Thank you, friend. Happy. Was that you, buddy? Jake's voice was barely a whisper. Was that you talking? Like really talking? Spark nodded eagerly and the feeling pulsed again, stronger. Yes. Help. Me. Jake sat back on his heels, his heart pounding. He didn't fully understand what had just happened, but he knew it was important. Huge. This wasn't just progress with vocal exercises. This was something else entirely. Something amazing. I don't know how you did that, Jake said, smiling wide enough that his cheeks hurt, but that was incredible. You're incredible. Behind him, in the shadows Jake never bothered to check, a massive shape shifted. Matriarch Valara's enormous head tilted, her ancient eyes fixed on the human who'd just experienced his first true telepathic contact. Her scales, which had been flickering between deep crimson and amber for days now, settled into a solid, soft amber glow. A color her scales hadn't held in over 300 years. It was the color of trust, of recognition, of seeing something in another species that she'd believed lost to time. This human, with his simple methods and patient heart, had achieved what trained specialists of a dozen species would have said was impossible. He'd helped her child find its voice. And in doing so, he'd done something even more remarkable. He'd reminded Valara why her species had once believed in the younger races. Before the wars. Before the betrayals. Before they'd retreated into isolation and rage. He'd reminded her what hope felt like. Jake was riding high on the breakthrough with Spark. The little dragon had just communicated telepathically for the first time, and Jake's heart was still racing from the experience. He turned to grab another protein bar from his cleaning cart, already planning what exercises they'd try next, when his body went cold. Something was wrong. The air had changed. It was thick now, heavy, pressing against him like a physical weight. The temperature had spiked at least 10 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. Jake's cleaning cart, which he'd left just a few feet away in the corridor, suddenly seemed very far away. He turned around slowly, every instinct screaming danger. A creature the size of a small building stood in the corridor behind him. Jake's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. Scales that looked like molten metal, shifting between deep red and amber in the dim light. A body so massive it nearly filled the entire corridor, and Jake had no idea how something that large had moved so silently. 4 powerful legs, each ending in claws that could probably slice through the station's hull. Wings folded against its back, too large for this space but somehow tucked away. And eyes. Ancient, intelligent eyes the size of dinner plates, burning with an intensity that made Jake feel like an insect under a magnifying glass. This was a fully grown Dracthra. And Jake had been sitting here, playing teacher with its baby, completely unaware. Oh, Jake whispered, his voice barely working. His mouth had gone completely dry. You must be Mom. The creature's eyes narrowed, and then something hit Jake's mind like a freight train. The telepathic voice wasn't like Spark's gentle emotional pulses. This was a tidal wave of pure power, crashing through every defense Jake didn't even know he had. The voice was female, ancient beyond measure, and it carried the weight of civilizations that had risen and fallen before humans ever looked at the stars. Why did you help? The question wasn't curious. It was a demand. A test. And Jake felt the power behind it like hands around his throat. His knees buckled, and he had to grab the edge of the maintenance shaft to keep from falling. His vision swam. He could feel his nose bleeding, something warm trickling down his upper lip. But Jake Morrison had been raised by a single mom who worked 2 jobs and still found time to teach her kids to stand up for what was right. He'd been the oldest of 4 siblings, responsible for keeping them safe when Mom was working nights. He'd learned young that sometimes you had to stand your ground even when you were scared out of your mind. So he forced himself upright. His legs shook. His hands trembled. But he stood. Because Jake's voice cracked and he had to swallow hard before continuing. Because no kid should hurt alone. I don't care if they're human or alien or a dragon. They're still a kid. And I saw a kid who needed help. The massive creature moved closer, each step making the floor vibrate. Jake's every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. And honestly, if this thing wanted him dead, running wouldn't help anyway. It could probably turn him to ash before he took 2 steps. The Dracthra lowered her enormous head until those burning eyes were level with Jake's. He could feel the heat radiating off her scales. Could smell something like cinnamon and smoke. This close, he could see scars on her scales, marks of battles that had probably happened before his great-grandparents were born. I could destroy this station. The voice in his mind was quieter now but no less powerful. I could turn you to ash where you stand. My kind does not forgive those who harm our young. We have ended entire civilizations for less. Jake believed her. He could see it in those ancient eyes. This wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. He was looking at a creature that had probably done exactly that, maybe more than once. But Jake also thought about Spark. About those golden eyes filled with pain and fear. About the way the little dragon had learned to wave goodbye. About that pulse of gratitude and affection he'd felt just moments ago. I know, Jake said quietly, meeting those massive eyes even though it felt like staring into the sun. I know you could. And if you're gonna do it, I can't stop you. But I didn't harm him. Jake gestured back toward the maintenance shaft where Spark was watching with wide eyes. I helped him. That's all I did. I saw someone hurt and I helped. The silence that followed felt like it lasted a year. Jake's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Blood dripped from his nose onto his uniform. His whole body shook with the effort of staying upright under that telepathic pressure. Then something changed. The weight on Jake's mind eased just slightly. The heat in the air dropped a few degrees. And the Dracthra's scales, which had been swirling with angry crimson, began to shift. The red faded, replaced by that soft amber color Jake had glimpsed before. The massive creature studied him for another long moment. Jake felt like she was reading his entire life story, every memory, every choice he'd ever made. It was invasive and terrifying and he couldn't do anything to stop it. Finally, the telepathic voice came again, softer this time. Almost gentle. Yes, you did. Jake's legs finally gave out and he sat down hard on the corridor floor. His whole body was shaking, adrenaline crashing through his system now that the immediate threat had passed. He put his head between his knees and tried to remember how to breathe. Behind the massive Dracthra, Spark chirped and sent out a pulse of concern. Friend. Okay. Jake looked up and somehow managed a weak smile. Yeah, buddy. I'm okay. Just give me a minute here. The matriarch's eyes softened, and Jake felt something he never expected. Approval. And beneath that, something even stranger. Respect. Jake thought things would go back to normal after that night. He figured Matriarch Valera would take Spark and leave, and he'd go back to being just another janitor on a space station. But nothing in his life had prepared him for what happened next. 3 days after the confrontation, Jake was mopping the floor near the central hub when Station Commander Phillips found him. Phillips was a no-nonsense woman who ran Horizon's Gate like a military operation, and Jake had maybe spoken to her twice in 8 months. Now she was standing in front of him, looking uncomfortable. Morrison, she said, we need to talk. Conference room. Now. Jake's stomach dropped. He'd broken protocols by not reporting the Dracthra hatchling. He was probably getting fired. Maybe worse. The conference room was packed. Not just with station personnel but with aliens Jake had only seen from a distance. Representatives from a dozen different species, all watching him with expressions he couldn't read. And standing in the corner, somehow fitting her massive form into the space, was Matriarch Valera. Jake Morrison. Her telepathic voice filled the room, but it was controlled now, not the overwhelming force from before. You have been claimed under Dracthra protection. This is an honor not granted to any outside our species in 3,000 standard years. Do you accept? Jake had no idea what that meant, but he felt Spark's presence somewhere nearby, sending encouraging pulses. Yes? I accept. What followed was the strangest week of Jake's life. Apparently, Matriarch Valera wasn't just any Dracthra. She was one of the oldest, most respected members of her species. And when she declared a human under her protection, it made waves across the entire galaxy. News feeds from 100 worlds picked up the story. A human janitor. A space dragon. An act of kindness that broke 3 millennia of isolation. Jake's face was suddenly everywhere and he hated it. He wasn't special. He just helped a kid who needed help. but the galaxy saw it differently. On the fifth day, Matriarch Valera did something unprecedented. She appeared before the Galactic Council, the governing body that oversaw relations between hundreds of species. Jake watched the broadcast from his quarters, feeling surreal about the whole thing. Valera's telepathic voice was broadcast across countless worlds. For 3,000 years, my kind has withdrawn from galactic affairs. We have watched the younger species with suspicion and disappointment. We remembered betrayals. We remembered violence against our young. We forgot to look for good. She paused, and Jake saw Spark sitting beside her, small but proud. Then this human, Jake Morrison, found my injured offspring. He had every reason to walk away. His species protocols told him to report and avoid. He knew the danger. But he saw a child in pain and he helped. Not for reward. Not for recognition. Because it was right. The telepathic voice grew stronger, carrying across the stars. Humanity possesses something my species forgot. They see children as children first. Species second. This is not weakness as we once believed. This is strength. This is wisdom. And perhaps this is the key to the peace we all claim to want. Jake had to turn off the broadcast. It was too much. He wasn't some hero. He was just a guy who'd done what anyone should do. But apparently should and would were very different things in the galaxy. After that, things got weird. Jake tried to return to his normal routine, pushing his cleaning cart through the station's corridors at night. But now he had a regular visitor. Spark had recovered fully, its voice growing stronger every day. The young dragon would fly through the station corridors during Jake's shifts, practicing new sounds, sending telepathic pulses of random thoughts. Jake. I can fly backwards now. That's great, buddy. Can you fly backwards away from the freshly mopped floor? Spark also brought gifts. Chunks of crystallized star matter that apparently were valuable. Jake tried to refuse, but Spark would just leave them in his locker. He eventually started donating them to the station's emergency fund. The really strange part was how other species started approaching him. It started small. A Zenthari diplomat named Clix asked if they could talk. Over coffee in the station's mess hall, Clix admitted they were terrified of an upcoming negotiation with a species known for aggressive tactics. How did you manage your fear? Clix asked. When facing Matriarch Valera? The whole galaxy knows Dracthra can destroy ships with a thought. Jake stirred his coffee, thinking. I was scared. Really scared. But I figured, being scared doesn't mean you stop doing what's right. You just do it anyway, you know? Clix stared at him for a long moment, then made a sound Jake had learned meant laughter in their species. Humans are either very brave or very stupid. Usually both, Jake admitted with a grin. Word spread. A Kalian merchant asked advice about tensions with their trade partners. A group of students from 3 different species asked if they could interview him for a project about cross-cultural understanding. An entire trade delegation from a system Jake had never heard of requested permission to observe him work, saying they wanted to understand human methods. Jake felt like a zoo exhibit, but he tried to be patient. If talking to people helped somehow, he'd do it. On his last night of the shift cycle, 2 weeks after everything started, Jake sat in his usual spot in Corridor 12. The lights were dimmed to night cycle. His cleaning cart was parked nearby. And Spark was curled up next to him, the young dragon now about the size of a large dog. They were watching the stars through the massive viewport. Earth was out there somewhere, impossibly far away. Jake wondered what his family would think about all this. His mom would probably laugh and say something like, only you would make friends with a space dragon while mopping floors. You know what's funny, buddy? Jake said, scratching behind Spark's horned head. The scales there were softer, and Spark made a happy rumbling sound. Everyone out here is so advanced. You've got ships that can cross the galaxy in weeks. Weapons that can destroy planets. Medical tech that can cure diseases we haven't even figured out yet. All this amazing stuff. Spark's golden eyes looked up at him, and Jake felt the question before it came. But sometimes the most important thing is just being kind to someone who needs help. Doesn't matter how fancy your technology is. Doesn't matter how old or powerful your species is. Sometimes what matters is just seeing someone who's hurting and deciding to care. Spark was quiet for a moment, then sent a pulse of perfect clarity. The telepathy had grown so much stronger, each word now distinct.